Sometimes the people carrying the heaviest burdens are the ones smiling the hardest. The night everything changed looked ordinary at first. Crystal chandeliers reflected golden light across the ballroom. Waiters moved gracefully between tables. A string quartet played softly near the stage. Hundreds of guests filled the charity gala, dressed in elegant suits and evening gowns, laughing as though the world contained no problems that money or time could not solve. I stood near the registration table, checking schedules and confirming last-minute details for the event. That was my job. Keep everything running smoothly. Make sure everyone else felt comfortable. Make sure nobody noticed when I was struggling. After years of practice, I had become very good at it. My name was Samantha Reed, and if you asked anyone in that ballroom, they would probably describe me as dependable, organized, professional, the woman who always found solutions, the woman who never complained, the woman who always said she was fine. The funny thing about being known for strength is that eventually people stop checking to see whether you need help. They assume you will figure it out on your own. Most days, I encouraged that assumption. It was easier, simpler, safer. At least that was what I told myself. Across the ballroom, Vincent Moretti stood speaking with several business leaders near the stage. Even among a crowd filled with powerful people, he commanded attention without asking for it. He was the primary sponsor of the gala, owner of luxury hotels throughout the country, and a man whose reputation seemed larger than life. Yet there was something unusual about him. While everyone else focused on conversations, Vincent seemed to spend more time observing than speaking. His eyes missed very little. I tried not to look in his direction. Not because I disliked him. Because people like Vincent Moretti belonged in a completely different world than mine. Around 8 o'clock, the evening grew busier. Guests continued arriving. Schedules shifted. Small problems demanded immediate attention. I moved from one side of the ballroom to the other, smiling and answering questions. Nobody noticed how tightly I gripped my clipboard. Nobody noticed how exhausted I felt. Nobody except one person. I became aware of Vincent's attention before I actually looked at him. It was strange, like sensing a spotlight without seeing it. When our eyes finally met across the room, his expression changed slightly. Not curiosity, concern. The realization unsettled me immediately. I looked away and continued working. 10 minutes later, I nearly dropped a stack of event folders while helping a volunteer. The room tilted for a brief second. I caught myself against the edge of a table before anyone could notice. Or so I thought. "Miss Reed." The voice came from beside me. Calm, deep, controlled. I turned and found Vincent standing there. Up close, he seemed even more observant than before. "Are you all right?" he asked. The question was simple. The answer was automatic. "I am fine." His gaze remained steady. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he glanced at the folders in my hands, the tension in my posture, and the smile I was forcing onto my face. Somehow, it felt as though he could see every hidden crack beneath the surface. "No," he said quietly. "I do not think you are." Around us, the gala continued exactly as before. Music played. Glasses clinked. People laughed. Yet in that moment, it felt as though the entire room had gone silent. Because for the first time in a very long time, someone had looked directly at me and refused to believe the lie. Most people would have accepted my answer and moved on. That was how these conversations usually worked. Someone asked if you were all right. You said yes. Everyone continued with their evening. Nobody looked too closely. Nobody wanted to make things uncomfortable. Vincent Moretti was apparently not most people. For several seconds after I insisted I was fine, he simply studied me. Not in a rude way. Not with suspicion. More like someone trying to understand a puzzle that did not match the picture everyone else seemed to see. Finally, he nodded once. "Of course," he said. The words sounded polite. Yet something about his expression told me he was not convinced. Before I could respond, another guest approached him with a question about the evening's fundraising program. Vincent shifted his attention immediately and returned to business. The conversation ended. At least, I thought it had. The rest of the gala passed in a blur. I coordinated schedules, solved minor problems, directed volunteers, smiled for photographs I hoped nobody would ever show me. By the time the final guests began leaving, my feet ached and every muscle in my body felt exhausted. The ballroom slowly emptied. Staff members collected decorations. Chairs were folded. Tables were cleared. Near midnight, I finally gathered my belongings and headed toward the hotel exit. Outside, cold Chicago air greeted me immediately. I wrapped my coat tighter and started walking toward the parking garage. Miss Reed. I stopped. Vincent stood several feet away near the entrance. His driver waited beside a black sedan parked at the curb. The garage is 3 blocks away, he said. It is late. I managed a tired smile. I will survive. The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. I have no doubt. Then he handed me a small card. I looked down. It contained a phone number and nothing else. No title. No company logo. No explanation. What is this? I asked. My direct number. I stared at him. Why would I need that? Vincent's answer came without hesitation. Because sometimes strong people wait too long before asking for help. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he nodded politely and entered the waiting car. The sedan disappeared into traffic seconds later, leaving me standing beneath the glow of streetlights with a business card in my hand and a strange feeling in my chest. The following week, life returned to normal. Or at least the version of normal I had grown accustomed to. Meetings, deadlines, event planning, endless responsibilities. Yet Vincent's words stayed with me. Strong people wait too long before asking for help. Every time I opened my wallet, I saw the card tucked inside. Every time I considered throwing it away, I hesitated. Meanwhile, something else happened. I began noticing Vincent everywhere. Not because he followed me. Because Chicago's business community seemed to revolve around him. His name appeared. In newspapers, charity announcements, hotel openings, community projects. Yet one detail stood out. Every story described his success. None mentioned his reputation for noticing people. Then came Thursday afternoon. My office building hosted a planning meeting with several major sponsors for an upcoming charity initiative. Halfway through the presentation, the conference room door opened. Vincent walked inside. The room immediately shifted. Conversations paused. Attention followed him. Yet instead of taking the seat reserved at the head of the table, he chose a chair near the middle of the room, directly across from me. Throughout the meeting, he said very little. He listened, observed, occasionally asked thoughtful questions, the same way he had observed me at the gala. When the meeting finally ended, everyone stood and began gathering documents. I reached for my folder at the exact moment Vincent spoke. Quietly. So quietly nobody else noticed. You look even more tired than last week. My heart sank. Because the worst part was that he was right. The worst part about being seen is that once it happens, you cannot go back to being invisible. After Vincent quietly pointed out how exhausted I looked, I spent the rest of that afternoon pretending the comment did not affect me. I answered emails, scheduled meetings, reviewed event proposals. Outwardly, everything appeared normal. Inwardly, I could not stop thinking about it. Not because he had criticized me. Because he had noticed. Most people saw efficiency. They saw results. They saw a woman who always delivered what was expected. Vincent seemed to notice the cost of maintaining that image. That evening, I stayed at the office later than usual. The city outside my window gradually transformed from afternoon sunlight into a sea of glowing lights. By the time I finally packed my bag, most of the building was empty. The silence felt comforting. Empty offices asked nothing from me. Empty hallways did not expect smiles. As I stepped into the elevator, my phone vibrated. A single message appeared on the screen. Unknown number. For a moment, I almost ignored it. Then I opened it. The message contained only one sentence. Have you eaten dinner today? I stared at the screen. No introduction. No explanation. No signature. Yet somehow I already knew exactly who sent it. A laugh escaped before I could stop it. The question felt ridiculous. And strangely thoughtful. I typed a response before overthinking it. Not yet. The reply arrived less than a minute later. That is not an acceptable answer. For the first time all day, I smiled without forcing it. 30 minutes later, I found myself sitting in a quiet restaurant inside one of Vincent's hotels. The place was elegant without feeling intimidating. Warm lighting reflected against dark wood walls. Soft music drifted through the room. When Vincent arrived, he carried no briefcase. No assistants followed him. He looked less like a powerful businessman and more like a man taking a break from carrying responsibilities. "You came," he said as he sat down. "You made dinner sound mandatory." The corner of his mouth lifted. "Only highly recommended." The conversation that followed surprised me. We did not discuss business. We did not discuss problems. Instead, Vincent asked about books. My favorite childhood memories. Places I wanted to visit someday. Questions nobody had asked me in years. Most people knew what I did for a living. Very few people seemed interested in who I actually was. Halfway through dinner, I realized something unexpected. Vincent never interrupted. He never checked his phone. He never looked around the room searching for someone more important to talk to. His attention remained entirely present. That alone felt rare. At one point, he asked what I would do if money and expectations were not factors. I stared at my glass for several seconds. "I do not know," I admitted. "I have spent so much time being practical that I stopped asking myself questions like that." Vincent nodded thoughtfully. "Then maybe it is time to start." The answer stayed with me. Later, after dinner ended, we stepped outside onto the hotel terrace overlooking downtown Chicago. The skyline glittered beneath the night sky. Traffic moved like streams of light below us. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then Vincent glanced toward me. "You know what I find interesting?" he asked. "What?" "Everyone describes you as strong." I laughed softly. "That sounds accurate." He shook his head. "No. I think they describe you as resilient. There is a difference." I looked at him confused. Vincent's expression softened. "Strong people carry everything alone. Resilient people learn how to keep going." The city lights reflected in the distance as his words settled somewhere deep inside me. Because for the first time, I wondered whether surviving was not supposed to be my entire identity. The conversation on the hotel terrace stayed with me long after that evening ended. Resilient people learn how to keep going. The words followed me through meetings, grocery stores, morning commutes, and sleepless nights. At first, I tried to ignore them. Reflection was inconvenient. Reflection required honesty. And honesty had become surprisingly difficult. For years, I had built my life around responsibility. If someone needed help, I showed up. If a problem appeared, I solved it. If expectations were placed on my shoulders, I carried them. Somewhere along the way, I stopped asking whether I could keep carrying all of it. 2 weeks after dinner with Vincent, I found myself standing in front of my bathroom mirror before work. The apartment was silent except for the hum of the heating system. I looked tired. Not the kind of tired that disappears after a good night's sleep. The deeper kind. The kind that settles into a person's eyes. For a moment, I simply stared at my reflection. Then I did something unusual. Instead of rehearsing another day of pretending everything was fine, I asked myself a question. When was the last time you felt happy? The answer did not come immediately. That frightened me more than I wanted to admit. Later that afternoon, my phone vibrated with a message. It was Vincent. "Lunch tomorrow." Not a question. A statement. I smiled despite myself. The next day, we met at a quiet cafe overlooking the Chicago River. Snow had begun melting along the sidewalks, and sunlight reflected across the water. The city looked caught between seasons. Winter refusing to leave. Spring quietly arriving anyway. The symbolism was impossible to miss. We talked about ordinary things at first. Books, travel, architecture. Then Vincent asked a question that shifted the entire conversation. "When was the last time you took a day off?" I laughed. "A real day off? That is usually what the phrase means." I thought about it. 1 month. 2 months. Maybe longer. Eventually I shook my head. "I do not remember." Vincent leaned back slightly. His expression remained calm, but disappointment flickered across his face. Not disappointment in me. Disappointment in the fact that I believed such a thing was normal. Samantha, he said quietly, what would happen if you stopped trying to earn your right to rest? The question landed harder than I expected, because deep down I knew the answer. I had spent years treating rest like a reward rather than a necessity, a luxury instead of a basic human need. The realization sat heavily between us. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then something unexpected happened. For the first time since meeting Vincent, I told him part of the truth. Not all of it, just enough. I told him about constantly feeling responsible for everyone around me. I told him about growing up believing that being dependable mattered more than being happy. I told him how exhausting it felt to always appear strong. Vincent listened without interrupting, without offering solutions, without trying to fix anything. When I finished, he simply nodded. That sounds lonely. For words. That was all. Yet my throat tightened immediately. Because everyone else had called me capable, organized, reliable. He was the first person who recognized the loneliness hidden underneath it all. And for the first time in a very long while, I stopped pretending he was wrong. The message appeared on a Monday morning. By noon, half the city seemed to be talking about it. I discovered it by accident while reviewing schedules for an upcoming charity fundraiser. One of my coworkers walked into the office holding a tablet. Have you seen this? She asked. Before I could answer, she placed the screen in front of me. The article featured Vincent Moretti. That alone was not unusual. His name appeared in the news regularly. What caught my attention was the headline. It described a speech he had delivered the previous evening at a leadership conference attended by executives, investors, and community leaders from across the country. Curious, I opened the article. The speech itself was surprisingly simple. There were no announcements about profits, no discussions about expansion plans, no grand displays of power. Instead, Vincent had spent nearly 20 minutes talking about something entirely different. Respect. Human dignity. The responsibility people have to protect those who carry invisible burdens. One paragraph from the speech had already begun circulating online. Success means very little if the people around you feel unseen. Strength is not measured by how much pressure someone can survive. Strength is measured by whether we create environments where people no longer have to survive alone. I read the words twice, then a third time. Something about them felt deeply personal. Not because he mentioned me. He had not. Not because anyone else would recognize their meaning. They would not. Yet I remembered every conversation we had shared over the previous weeks. Every question. Every observation. Every moment he challenged ideas I had accepted for years. By afternoon, the speech had spread everywhere. Business journals discussed it. Community organizations praised it. Social media filled with conversations about workplace culture, compassion, and leadership. The response surprised people because it was unexpected. Powerful men were supposed to talk about winning. Vincent had chosen to talk about protecting. Later that evening, I received a text message. Dinner tomorrow. I smiled immediately. The next night, we met at a quiet restaurant overlooking Lake Michigan. Snow clouds drifted above the dark water beyond the windows. The atmosphere felt calm, familiar, safe. Halfway through dinner, I finally asked the question that had been lingering in my mind all day. Why did you give that speech? Vincent looked up from his coffee. Which part? The part everyone is talking about. He considered the question carefully. Because I spent years believing leadership was about authority. And now? His expression softened slightly. Now I think it is about responsibility. The answer sounded simple. Yet I knew there was more behind it. For several moments, silence settled between us. Then Vincent leaned back in his chair. Most people notice problems only after they become impossible to ignore, he said. I think we should pay attention sooner. The words lingered between us. Suddenly, I understood something important. The message was never intended to impress anyone. It was not a publicity strategy. It was not a business decision. It was a statement of values. A declaration that people mattered. That kindness mattered. That dignity mattered. As we prepared to leave, Vincent opened the restaurant door and waited for me to step outside first. A small gesture, easy to overlook. Yet walking beside him beneath the city lights, I realized the speech had changed something. Not in the business world. Not in the headlines. In me. Because for the first time, I was beginning to believe that maybe the way I had been treated for years was not normal. And maybe, just maybe, I deserved better. The changes began so quietly that most people probably never noticed them. I did. Because for the first time in years, life felt different. Not easier. Different. The morning after dinner with Vincent, I arrived at the office expecting another ordinary day. Emails. Meetings. Deadlines. Instead, I discovered something unexpected. One of our largest corporate partners had announced a new employee wellness initiative inspired by Vincent's speech. Then another organization followed. A week later, several local charities introduced support programs for volunteers experiencing burnout. The ideas spread faster than anyone anticipated. Everywhere I looked, people were discussing compassion, balance, and the importance of checking on those who seemed strongest. It felt strange watching a conversation grow from words most people would have dismissed only months earlier. More surprising was what happened inside my own life. Small things began changing. My coworkers started asking how I was doing and actually waiting for the answer. Friends I had not spoken to in months reached out. One even admitted she had spent years pretending she was fine too. The honesty startled both of us. One evening, while organizing files after work, my manager stopped by my desk. "You have not taken vacation time in almost a year," she said. I laughed awkwardly. "I have been busy." Exactly. The next morning, a formal request appeared in my inbox. 5 paid days off. Approved automatically. No arguments accepted. I stared at the screen for nearly a minute. Then I laughed. A real laugh. The kind that arrives unexpectedly. When I told Vincent about it later, he looked entirely unsurprised. "Good. That is all you have to say? It is progress." We were sitting beside a large window inside one of his hotels. Rain tapped softly against the glass outside. The city shimmered beneath gray clouds. "You sound disappointed," he added. "I think I expected a bigger reaction." Vincent smiled faintly. "Samantha, people spend years waiting for dramatic moments. Most lives change through small decisions repeated consistently." The answer lingered in my mind. Because deep down, I knew he was right. Healing was not happening through grand gestures. It was happening through conversations. Boundaries. Rest. Honesty. Tiny choices that slowly altered the direction of a life. Later that week, I used one of my vacation days to visit the lakefront. No schedule. No responsibilities. No deadlines. Just a long walk beside the water. The air smelled clean. Waves rolled gently against the shoreline. For the first time in years, I sat on a bench with absolutely nothing I needed to accomplish. At first, the silence felt uncomfortable. Then something surprising happened. I began enjoying it. My phone buzzed shortly before sunset. A message from Vincent appeared. "How was your day?" I looked out across the water before answering. "Peaceful." Several minutes passed before his reply arrived. "Good. You deserve peaceful." I read the sentence twice. Then a third time. The words seemed simple. Yet they touched something deep inside me. Because nobody had ever said that before. Most people wished me success. Productivity. Achievement. Vincent wished me peace. As the sun disappeared beyond the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber, I realized something important. The message he sent into the world had changed many lives. But the message he kept repeating to me was changing mine. Little by little, day by day, I was beginning to believe it. A month later, I found the box while cleaning my apartment. It sat on the highest shelf inside my bedroom closet, hidden behind winter blankets and old storage containers. Dust covered the lid. I almost ignored it. Almost. Something about seeing it there stirred a memory I could not immediately place. Curious, I carried the box into the living room and opened it. Inside were photographs, birthday cards, school certificates, small pieces of a life I had not examined in years. Near the bottom sat a bundle of letters tied together with a faded blue ribbon. My breath caught instantly. I recognized the handwriting before I even unfolded the first page. My father. He had passed away when I was young. Over the years, memories became fragments. A laugh, a voice, a few stories told by relatives. But here, preserved in ink, were his actual words. I sat on the floor and began reading. The first letter was written shortly before my 10th birthday. Then another. And another. Dozens of pages. Some contained advice. Others described ordinary family moments. Yet one theme appeared again and again. My father constantly worried that I would grow up believing my worth depended on how much I could do for other people. By the fifth letter, tears blurred the words. In one passage he wrote, "Samantha, if you ever read this years from now, remember something. Kindness is a gift. It is not a debt you owe the world. You do not have to earn your place by carrying everyone's burdens." I stopped reading and stared out the apartment window. The city skyline shimmered beneath a gray afternoon sky. My heart felt strangely heavy and strangely light, because suddenly everything connected. The exhaustion, the constant responsibility, the inability to ask for help. Somewhere after losing my father, I had unconsciously turned usefulness into identity. If I could help everyone, perhaps nobody would leave. If I could solve every problem, perhaps I would always matter. It was not logic. It was fear disguised as responsibility. That evening, I met Vincent at his favorite corner table inside the hotel restaurant. The letters came with me. When I finished explaining what I had discovered, he remained silent for several moments. Then he carefully picked up one page and read a few lines. "Your father understood something important," he said quietly. "What?" Vincent returned the letter. He knew the difference between being loved and being needed. The sentence landed with surprising force. Because deep down, I understood exactly what he meant. For years, I chased being needed. At work, among friends, within family relationships. Needed felt safe. Needed felt predictable. Needed guaranteed a place. But love was different. Love existed even when you were tired. Even when you were imperfect. Even when you had nothing left to give. The realization unsettled me in the best possible way. We spent the next hour discussing the letters. Childhood memories surfaced. Questions surfaced. Truths surfaced. By the time dinner ended, I felt emotionally exhausted and oddly hopeful at the same time. Walking home beneath the city lights, I looked up at the dark sky and thought about my father's words. Maybe the real secret hidden inside those letters was not advice. Maybe it was permission. Permission to stop proving my worth every single day. Permission to rest. Permission to receive care instead of constantly providing it. And for the first time since opening that dusty box, I realized something beautiful. The people who truly loved me had been trying to teach me that lesson all along. I was only now beginning to listen. The decision arrived on a rainy Thursday morning. No dramatic announcement. No life-changing phone call. Just a quiet realization while standing in my kitchen watching water slide down the apartment window. For months, maybe years, I had organized my life around avoiding disappointment. Every choice passed through the same filter. Would this upset someone? Would this create conflict? Would this make me seem selfish? Somewhere along the way, I stopped asking a more important question. What do I actually want? The thought stayed with me throughout the day. During meetings. During phone calls. During conversations that suddenly felt very different. By evening, I found myself sitting alone with my father's letters spread across the coffee table. One passage caught my attention again. The same passage I had already read a dozen times. You do not need permission to build a life that brings you peace. I stared at those words for a long time. Then I did something that would have terrified the old version of me. The next morning, I requested a meeting with my supervisor. The opportunity had been sitting in front of me for months. A leadership position overseeing multiple community outreach programs. Everyone kept encouraging me to apply. Everyone except me. Fear always found a reason to wait. More experience. Better timing. Less risk. But sitting in that office, listening to my supervisor describe why she believed I was ready, I finally understood something. Confidence was not arriving someday in the future. Confidence was built by acting before certainty appeared. By the end of the meeting, my application was submitted. Walking back to my desk, my hands trembled slightly. Not because I regretted it. because I had finally chosen growth over comfort. That evening, I met Vincent at a rooftop terrace overlooking downtown Chicago. Spring had fully arrived. The city glowed beneath a sky painted with gold and blue light. When I told him what I had done, a slow smile appeared. "How does it feel?" he asked. I laughed softly. "Terrifying." "Good. You always say that." "Because it is usually true." I shook my head. "You know, most people would offer reassurance." Vincent rested his arms against the railing and looked toward the skyline. "Reassurance is temporary. Courage lasts longer." The answer settled somewhere deep inside me. For a while, we stood there watching the city. Then another truth surfaced, one I had avoided discussing for months. "I called my mother this morning," I said quietly. Vincent glanced toward me. "And?" For the first time, I told her how overwhelmed I have been. Even saying the words felt strange. For years, I protected everyone from my struggles. This time I chose honesty. The conversation had not been perfect. It had been real. My mother listened. She apologized for things she never realized had affected me. We cried. We laughed. We started rebuilding something that had been neglected for far too long. "How do you feel now?" Vincent asked. I looked out across the city lights. Lighter. The answer surprised me because it was true. Not healed. Not finished. Just lighter. The burden felt smaller because I was no longer carrying it alone. As the evening continued, I realized something important. The biggest change in my life was not the new opportunity. It was not the speech. It was not even the letters. The biggest change was that I had stopped waiting for permission to matter. For the first time, I was making decisions based on hope instead of fear. And standing beside Vincent beneath the spring sky, I knew there was no going back to the person I used to be. 1 year later, the city looked completely different. Or maybe I did. Summer sunlight poured through the tall windows of the community center as dozens of volunteers moved through the building preparing for the annual outreach conference. Children laughed in nearby classrooms. Families gathered in meeting rooms. Teachers, counselors, and community leaders filled the halls with conversation and energy. Standing near the entrance, reviewing final details before the event began, I felt something I had not felt in a very long time. Peace. Not the fragile kind that disappears when life becomes difficult. The deeper kind. The kind built slowly through healing, honesty, and time. The leadership position I once feared applying for had become one of the greatest blessings of my life. The outreach programs expanded. New partnerships formed. Thousands of people benefited from services that barely existed a year earlier. Every day brought challenges. Yet for the first time, my life felt aligned with who I truly was instead of who I thought I needed to be. Across the room, my mother laughed with several volunteers while helping arrange registration packets. Our relationship was not perfect. It was real, honest, stronger than it had been in years. Nearby, framed inside my office, one of my father's letters rested beside a photograph of our family. His words continued guiding me long after he was gone. The event officially began shortly after noon. As I stepped onto the stage to welcome everyone, applause filled the room. Looking out across hundreds of faces, I remembered the woman who once struggled to believe she deserved space in the world. The memory felt distant now. Not forgotten. Transformed. After the conference ended, I slipped outside to escape the noise for a few minutes. The summer air felt warm against my skin. Chicago stretched before me beneath a clear blue sky. You still disappear when events get too crowded. The familiar voice made me smile before I even turned around. Vincent stood nearby, hands in his pockets, looking exactly as calm and composed as ever. Some things never changed. Occupational habit, I replied. I thought leaders were supposed to stay visible. I learned from a very wise businessman that occasional peace is important. A rare laugh escaped him. We began walking slowly along the riverfront. The afternoon sunlight reflected across the water. Tour boats drifted past. The city moved around us with its usual energy. Yet everything felt remarkably calm. Do you remember the gala? Vincent asked after a while. The night we met? I nodded. Unfortunately, yes. You told me you were fine. I shook my head, smiling. I was very committed to that story. Vincent glanced toward me. Not anymore. The simple observation carried more meaning than he probably realized. Because he was right. Not anymore. Somewhere during the previous year, I stopped hiding behind strength. I stopped measuring my worth through sacrifice. I stopped believing that asking for support made me weak. Most importantly, I stopped believing I had to face everything alone. We reached a quiet section of the Riverwalk and paused. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then Vincent handed me a small envelope. Inside was a single card. On the front were the words from the speech that had changed so many lives. Strength is measured by whether we create environments where people no longer have to survive alone. Beneath the quote, handwritten in his careful script, was a second sentence. The message was never for the world. It was for you. My eyes filled with tears immediately. Not from sadness. From gratitude. Because I finally understood. The unexpected message he sent all those months ago was never about business. Never about reputation. Never about power. It was about reminding one person that she mattered. And in doing so, he changed 2 lives instead of 1. As we continued walking beneath the summer sky, I realized something beautiful. Sometimes the most extraordinary act of protection is not rescuing someone from their struggles. Sometimes it is helping them remember their own worth until they can finally see it for themselves.